If you truly want to understand how old ancient Egypt is, you must consider the following. Mesopotamian script called cuneiform, the oldest in the world, is about 3400 BC, while ancient Egyptian writing is about 3200 BC, questioning the idea of writing came from Mesopotamia. And to make matters worse, the writing of ancient Egypt looks nothing like the writing of Mesopotamia, making it look like the origin must have been from a purely African centric view. But to further illustrate this point, if you look at a place like ancient China, where a lot of people assume that the writing came independently, their earliest writings are from 1050 to 1250 BC. This is the time of Ramses II, and there had already been tons of pharaohs before that. Just to put things in context, the earliest writing system in Europe is from 2000 BC and it's called Linear A and Linear B. This is about 1,500 years after Egypt had already invented writing. It's easy to say, okay, so Mesopotamia and Egypt invented writing. The problem is the writing that is found in Egypt is in Upper Egypt, which is closer to Sudan. In fact, there's a lot of items that are found in Sudan or Upper Egypt date anything that you can find in Egypt proper or Lower Egypt. And as I showed in the previous video, Sudanese civilization is almost as old as ancient Egypt, though they differ in some ways, especially their giant love for megalithic structures. On that, Egypt wins every day. Now to get to the real arguments. During the 25th dynasty, the Cushitic Empire, known as the Black Pharaohs, took over Egypt and made it their home. They created statues which some people claim are more black looking than the ancient Egyptians. This is my point. The pictures that I have on the screen are actually from the Middle Kingdom, and they have nothing to do with the 25th dynasty that was embodied by the Nubians. But I'm sure some of you thought that they were, and I did it on purpose because you can tell by their features that they're black. If this is the best attempt the Egyptians have at drawing Arabic people, then they need artistic lessons. When the ancient Egyptian drew the Nubians, this is what they saw. It's clear by the aesthetic that they were trying to draw Nilotic people with their long limbs and their small head and their tall bodies. And that's fine, except for one thing. That's not how the Sudanese people who live in that area look like today. There has been race mixing from as far back as 600 AD and 600 BC. A study came out that proved that during the Christian Revolution of North Africa, there were some Dinka people who mated with some female Middle Eastern woman. And there's definitely more studies to prove that the Sudanese have recently mixed with Middle Eastern people. Let's read it together. Genetic studies of present-day Nubians reveal a mix of sub-Saharan African and West Eurasian related ancestry. But the mixture is largely a result of the Arab conquest of late 1st and 2nd millennia CE, a time in which people with Eurasian-related ancestry spread southwards along the Nile through Egypt and into Nubia. Because more recent admixture events obscure our understanding of ancestry of people who predate these events, the analysis of paleogenomic data from Kulub-Narti offers an opportunity to directly investigate the ancestry and biological relationship of the Nubian group that lived in the region before the introduction of Islam. So the question is, if the Middle Eastern people who moved into Sudan from the second century AD all the way till today have completely changed the demographics of the population to the point that it obscures who came before, isn't it possible that the same thing occurred in Egypt, especially when you consider the fact that in order to get to Sudan back in the day, they would travel through Egypt? You cannot get from the Middle East all the way to Sudan without crossing Egypt, not if you're a reasonable person. And of course, there were no helicopters or airplanes back then. Armed with this knowledge, consider the following: 30% of the Coptic DNA was Greek brought. There's a Middle Eastern front that comes in and changes things from the first century AD onwards, and a 10% increase of sub-Saharan DNA due to slavery. This is the DNA of the modern Egyptians. So saying that they are not exactly the same as the ancient civilization occupiers is an understatement. If I have failed so far to convince you that Arabic people didn't just colonize Egypt and Sudan and the Middle East and then run away, then here's one more argument for you. When in history has that ever happened where the colonists don't fuse with the population? When the Mongols took over any place, they mixed with the general population. A good number of people today are of Mongol DNA due to the giant influx. When the Vikings took over in Britain, they changed the DNA of the British. When the Romans took over France, they changed the DNA of the French. When the Spanish and the Portuguese took over the Americas, they changed the DNA of the Americas. Even in South Africa, when the white South Africans landed in South Africa, they fused with the large population of the people, creating a giant mixed race population that is the second biggest after the natives. This idea of people colonizing a land and then running away doesn't happen.